We are now approaching our keynote speech, ASEAN 2015 Challenges and Opportunities, held by Dr. Surin Pitsuwan. We are very honored to have Dr. Pitsuwan with us here today to share some of his experience and insight with us. Dr. Surin Pitsuwan has, besides extensive experience within ASEAN, also worked as an advisor for major organizations such as the UN, UNESCO, and International Crisis Group. And he is now today working in a think tank called Future Innovative Thailand Institute, advising on education, corruption, and economic policy. I am very happy to invite Dr. Surin Pitsuwan to the stage to present.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please excuse the voice. It's not as sexy as it should be. I'm suffering from an allergy of uncertainty and instability in Thailand. I think it is very fitting that all of you have chosen to be here this morning, focusing on issues like human security. Because on the streets out there, I don't think there's much human security. We are going through, Thailand and others in the region are going through a process of a major transformation, as you are aware of. And that transformation is probably going to be very, very disruptive in a way, and it's going to be constructive in a sense, going into the future. Disruptive because many of us will have to adjust to the new emerging environment in the region. 10 economies, 2.5.6 trillion US dollars combined GDP, 600 million people, with tremendous differences and diversity among ourselves. About 140 billion US dollars a year FDI coming into the region, and a lot of influences and a lot of issues exerting upon us from outside. In that sense, the region has to adjust quite quick, quite fast. But the fact that it is the most diversified region of the world is certainly difficult to manage. And I'm glad you are picking up on two communities. ASEAN Economic Community, which is very dynamic and will have a far-reaching implications on the region, and the socio-cultural community pillar, which will be that necessary foundation for the ASEAN community to really be built or be achieved on a solid and strong foundation. You have heard a lot about the ASEAN Economic Community, because the private sector is extremely interested and motivated by that concept. ASEAN trades among ourselves and with the world more than what we produce. I gave you the figure of 2.5, 2.6 trillion US dollars GDP combined, but we trade about 2.7, 2.8 trillion US dollars. That figure only includes 25% of ASEAN to ASEAN trade. And that is a very low figure for an economic community to come into being. NAFTA trades among themselves, the three countries, Canada, the US, and Mexico, 68-70%. They trade with the world only 30%. The EU, as Ambassador Schultz will testify, within 27, 28 members, they trade about 75%, only among and between themselves. They trade with the world only 25%. So you see, there is that small portion of trade that ASEAN will have to expand, that we will have to increase if we want to be a viable ASEAN economic community. But precisely because of this low figure in the ASEAN to ASEAN trade, to increase it is exactly what Mr. John Brandon said. It will have to be the small guys and small gals working into the landscape, walking into the landscape. And that is, of course, the small and medium-sized enterprises. Just like anywhere else, small and medium-sized enterprises in ASEAN contribute about 60-65% to our GDP. Employment is higher than that. But that is where instability is going to take place as far as employment is concerned, as far as resiliency is concerned. Are they going to be able to sustain the onslaught of this major movement of FDI coming into the region? And what will happen to the issue of migrant workers? A country like Thailand is moving up our economic productive scale. We are moving from labor-intensive to a higher level of technological content in our economic production. Labor costs in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Brunei for that matter, has risen so much that local workforce are no longer interested in, the industries can no longer afford to hire local workforce. So migrant workers are now moving on the landscape whether or not ASEAN or member states of ASEAN are ready. And I think Thailand is a good case in point. About 3 million floating on this landscape. Maybe only half legal. And maybe less than half protected. And even less than that, fully protected, with their rights, with their privileges are being respected. So the issue of this human security or human insecurity is an issue that the ASEAN community, particularly ASEAN socio-cultural community, will have to pay particular attention to. I just came up from the border with Malaysia, General Bachon. There's a city on the frontier called Tan North, just about 40 kilometers from Hat Yai. Bustling, growing, dynamic. Most tourists are from Malaysia. Some of them come as far as Singapore, but they are there for services that are not quite legal. Definitely human trafficking is at work along the borders there. And where are these people from? Across the border, north of Thailand, west of Thailand, all the way to southern China. Economy is growing, but elements of risk to the people in this economy, whether they are local, whether they are migrants, whether they are foreigners, are very much here on the landscape. Human trafficking is here too. The other issue is how some of these industries in Thailand, construction, food processing, fishery, how can these industries, major industries in the country, survive without foreign labor? It is tough. Half of the population of Samut Sakhon province, where the fishery industry, where the food processing industry, fishery, are located, half of the population, over half of the population, are foreigners. If foreigners are taken back, the entire industry is going to crumble. So, the awareness and the realization that these people are the factor of production, with their own rights, with their own privileges, with their own welfare, must also be built into the business planning. 2 years after I arrived at the Secretariat in Jakarta, we were told by WHO Bangkok, we were told by UNICEF Bangkok, that these people in the fishery industry who speak no Thai, who are mostly illegals, have no access to health care because they are illegals, because they were afraid to report themselves. I had to appeal to the Human Security Trust Fund in New York, asking for $3 million so that they can help these unfortunate people to have access to health care. So the mental attitude, the attitude of the private sector themselves, of the officials themselves, that these people are here to serve a function. They must not be exploited. They must not be taken advantage of. And their health is the health of our own community. Imagine elephantitis. What's that called? Elephantitis? The big foot? Rok Tao Chang in Thai. Swollen foot of feet. Malaria or AIDS. These are what we call issues without borders, issues and problems that would need no visa or no passport to move cross borders or to affect the rest of the community. That sensitivity has to be built still into our people. So migrant workers are critical issue, one of the critical issues for ASEAN. Education. You have heard many universities across the landscape are now adjusting their calendar, academic calendar, so that they can be synchronized. So that our young people, our students can move cross-border more easily. Indonesians can come here, take courses, be given credit for, move back. Malaysian students come, Thai students go. This is to facilitate. But it is very difficult. We have something what we call the ASEAN University Network, about 30 institutions around the region. It's extremely difficult to bring the standards to the same level, recognized by all of them. Something similar to the Bologna system that you have in Europe. It is still at a very, very early stage, but they are now talking, they are now moving, because without easy flow of people, there is no community. You can talk about the flow of the goods, the flow of the services, access to services. You don't have to move here to use Thai telephone. You can access to it from outside. You don't have to come here to access to the facility or the service of the Thai hospitals. You can access through this from Laos, from Cambodia, from Myanmar. So you can access to services, you can facilitate the movement of goods, but if the people don't move, you don't have a community. That is something that we also have to work on and to enhance that mobility among our people. We don't need visas anymore from each other. It's just how many days, the difference. And I think some countries are a bit reluctant. They want to see, they want to know. And some of them would say, yes, guaranteed ASEAN citizens, but upon arrival, you pay some fees because they need the income. But it's not the requirement of the visas. So that is another issue, how to facilitate movement of people. So AEC and ASEAN socio-cultural community are essentially quite very, very much related to each other. We won't have one until we have the other. But you hear less about the ASEAN cultural community, partly because only people like you are interested in it. The international NGOs, not the big powers, not the major powers. They are more interested in political security. They are more interested in economic community. Therefore, you have heard of them more, and probably they have made more progress because there has been influence from outside, or encouragement from outside, or engagement from outside. ASEAN has been forced to move on the political and security agenda. ASEAN has been forced to move on the economic community agenda, but less on the socio-cultural. But it is not any less important, not any less critical. In fact, for the community, ASEAN community, AC, Big C, to emerge and to be strong and to be efficient, to be resilient, definitely the socio-cultural pillar must be addressed or must be strengthened. And I'm glad you are interested and focused on that. But it is no less challenging than the political insecurity, no less challenging than the economic. We are not talking about concessions on tariffs. We are not talking about concessions on protectionism. But we are talking about diversity of values. ASEAN socio-cultural community will have to be driven and activated by the people of ASEAN. It took me a lot of effort to convince member states in Jakarta that we need to interact and we need to work with the civil society. This is diversity of value. Some member states said, yes, Mr. Secretary General, you can work with the civil society, but they have to be our civil society. Endorsed by the government, endorsed by the officials. And coming from the academic background, coming from a political background, going into that office, it's very difficult for me to accept that definition, or to accept that condition, that you work with the civil society, but it will have to be our civil society. Civil society is civil society. Civil society are noisy. Civil society are sometimes single issue organizations. You work on one issue and you are extremely committed to it, and you don't care about any other issues. You are passionate about your issue and you don't accept any limitations, and the governments can't tell you that, wait, because you have that commitment, that passion to that single issues that you have. So it is extremely difficult to bring the people in, to bring the civil society in, to bring the NGOs into the process. But without them, very little can be done. ASEAN will have to struggle through this reservation that they have, and this necessity that the civil society will have to be given the space in the process of our community building process. Of all the issues in the socio-cultural issues, the challenge of trying to give people safety nets and fundamental rights, human rights, are also difficult. You know of the old debate about Asian values and universal values. Countries in ASEAN, although not all subscribe to the Asian values approach, those who are not are quite comfortable hiding behind that concept. And there are those who would insist that there are universal values that ASEAN will have to subscribe ourselves to. But because of their own political internal differences and struggles inside, it's very difficult for them to move up to the front and say, yes, we are universalists. I'm talking about countries like Indonesia, like Thailand, like the Philippines, are very much universalists in this debate of Asian and universal values. President Yudhoyono called his democracy a noisy democracy, and difficult for him to move on that agenda. to advance the role of the civil society, to enhance human rights, to enhance the participation, or to expand the space. Quite difficult, but committed to. Thailand are of, I don't know, 2 or 3 minds. Sometimes, in some situation, Thailand would be extremely universalist. But in some situations, are not quite committed. And this depends on the ups and downs of the political landscape here. I was at ASEAN 5 years. I worked with 5 Thai prime ministers. And you can't expect that the values, the principles that are used in order to deal with a lot of these problems would be the same. Some have even more emphasis than others on these issues. Some would give less emphasis on these issues, more interested in something else. Some just don't have time to pay any attention to any issue. Just come and go, 3 months, that's it. The Philippines is extremely universalist. Philippines is extremely committed. Philippines is extremely open. I guess it's the heritage, it's a legacy, and the structure of the society. Rather exposed, rather open, American influence, Western oriented in the mentality. Catholic influence, Christian Catholic kind of mentality, values, makes the Philippines more open and more, I guess, Western universalist as far as these things are concerned. Now, the debate certainly has given ASEAN the instability, the discontinuity of moving forward. We have ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, but the emphasis is on promotion, not protection. And the Asian value side, represented by Singapore and Malaysia, would argue that the state provides everything. If there is any need to protect human rights, go to the criminal law. Go to the existing law. There is no need for new mechanism or new regimes to protect or to promote. Human rights protection, human rights promotion are being seen as the extension of the patronage of the state. Not the other way around, that they are the rights of the people to demand that the state shall limit its power so that these human rights shall be protected and shall be promoted and shall be pursued by the people. You see the two approaches, the differences. And this certainly has rendered us, this debate has rendered us a bit slow in the development of the human rights protection measures. We're still working on promotion, promotion, and promotion. Because you can't go wrong with promotion. You can't oppose promotion. You can't say no to promotion. Yes, go on and promote. When it comes to protection, it's been that Intergovernmental Commission of Human Rights, ASEAN, will have to issue a statement calling upon member states to please take care of that issue because it affects me. Rohingyas in Myanmar, you must have heard the silence of the issue. Southern Thailand, you must have heard a rather deafening silence of the issue. The Buddhists and the Christians in Vietnam, you must have heard the silence, very conspicuous silence. Why? Because of this